5 people you should avoid in old age, even if they're family. Hello my friends, wherever you're watching from. I'm 81 years old now. I've buried dear friends. I've buried my wife. I've retired from a career I devoted more than 40 years to, and I've watched entire chapters of life disappear faster than I ever imagined. When you reach this age, something changes. You stop sugarcoating reality. You stop wrapping pain in polite language. You start telling the truth because you realize time is no longer unlimited. And that's exactly why I want to talk about 5 types of people you should avoid in your later years, even when they're family, even when you've known them your entire life, even when creating distance breaks your heart. Because eventually peace becomes far more valuable than approval. Some people can steal your peace without ever raising their voice, and in my experience, that's what makes them so difficult to recognize. Many of them don't appear dangerous at first. Some look like love, some look like family, some look like obligation, but given enough time, the pattern always reveals itself. Tonight, I want to share the 5 types of people I personally had to distance myself from, not as theories, not as lessons from a book, but as hard-earned truths that came from real experiences and real consequences. And the first one took me longer to understand than any of the others. The first person in my experience is the manipulator. I didn't recognize it in the beginning because manipulation rarely arrives loudly. It doesn't kick down the door. It shows up disguised as urgency, emotion, and responsibility. In my case, it was someone very close to me. Someone I loved deeply. Someone who always seemed to be standing on the edge of another crisis. Every phone call came with pressure. Every request felt urgent. Every problem somehow became mine to solve. And whenever I hesitated, the reaction would shift. Sometimes disappointment, sometimes fear, sometimes guilt. Little by little, I stopped noticing that my decisions were no longer entirely my own. I wasn't choosing anymore. I was simply reacting. What made it even harder was that every time I stepped in to help, there would be a brief moment of relief, followed by yet another emergency. The cycle never ended. My life slowly became organized around someone else's instability. It took me years to understand something important. Real love should not require you to sacrifice your own peace of mind. When I finally stepped back, I didn't do it with anger. I didn't argue. I didn't cut anyone off dramatically. I simply stopped rushing into rescue. I learned to pause. I learned to say no without writing a long explanation. And surprisingly, that small change transformed everything. Not overnight, but little by little, the pressure faded. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. The second person I had to understand looked completely different after years of dealing with emotional pressure. I eventually encountered what I now call the self-absorbed narcissist. This type of person doesn't always ask for help, but they also never truly see you. Conversations with them always found their way back to one subject: themselves. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was simply part of their personality. But over time, I began noticing something quietly happening inside me, a slow erosion. Whenever I shared something meaningful, it would somehow be redirected, overshadowed, or folded into their own story. Even my accomplishments became background noise in the ongoing narrative of their life. I remember sitting across from someone very close to me one afternoon and suddenly realizing something unsettling. I couldn't remember the last time they had asked me a genuine question about myself. Not a polite question, not a question asked out of habit, a real one. That realization stayed with me. It wasn't dramatic. There was no argument, no confrontation, just clarity. I had slowly become invisible inside one of my own relationships. So I began making small changes. I shortened conversations. I stopped waiting for validation that never arrived, and I started taking back my place in the dialogue, not aggressively, not angrily, just firmly. If I was interrupted, I calmly continued what I was saying. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost as if I were breaking an unwritten rule, but eventually I realized that rule had never been shared equally, and then came the third type of person. This one entered my life much more quietly, yet their impact was remarkably consistent. I'm talking about the critic. Critics rarely raise their voices. In fact, many genuinely believe they're helping. That's what makes them so difficult to recognize. Their comments arrive disguised as advice. As concern. As wisdom gained through experience, but the outcome is usually the same. You begin to question yourself. In my own life, this appeared through small remarks, comments about how I dressed, how I organized my home, how I spent my time after retirement. Even after a lifetime of building stability, somehow nothing seemed quite good enough through their eyes. At first, I absorbed those comments quietly. Later I would replay them in my mind, wondering if maybe they were right. That's the hidden damage caused by a constant critic. It doesn't tear down your confidence all at once. It slowly reshapes the way you see yourself, little by little, year by year, until one day you find yourself seeking approval you never truly needed. Eventually, I learned something that changed everything. Not every opinion deserves a place inside your mind. Some words are simply noise, even when they come from familiar voices, even when they come from people you've known for decades. So I began responding differently. I stopped defending every decision I made. I stopped explaining my life as though it needed someone else's approval. Instead, I would simply acknowledge their opinion and continue moving in the direction that felt right for me. And something unexpected happened. Those opinions gradually lost their power over me. The fourth type of person you should avoid is the irresponsible one. These are people who move through life leaving a trail of chaos behind them. Unpaid bills, broken promises, poor decisions, one crisis after another, and somehow they always expect someone else to step in and clean up the mess. Older adults often become easy targets for this behavior because younger relatives assume we have extra time, endless patience, or money to spare. They stop seeing us as people. They start seeing us as safety nets. I learned this lesson through my nephew, Daniel. Daniel wasn't a bad young man. At least not intentionally. He could be lazy. He was certainly careless, but he was charming enough that people kept giving him one more chance, then another and another. For years, he drifted from job to job. Whenever something fell apart, there was always an explanation. The boss was unfair, the economy was difficult, his coworkers were against him. Nothing was ever truly his responsibility. Then one winter, he asked if he could stay with me for a little while, temporarily. That word has trapped a lot of older people. At first, it sounded reasonable. He would help around the house, find steady work, save some money, and move out within a month or two. At least, that was the plan. But weeks turned into months. Dirty dishes began piling up. The utility bills increased. The quiet routines I had spent years building slowly disappeared. Before long, I found myself feeling irritated inside my own home. One afternoon, I returned from a doctor's appointment and found Daniel asleep on the couch at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Several empty beer bottles sat on the table beside him. Meanwhile, I had spent the entire morning worrying about my blood pressure results and whether my heart medication needed to be adjusted, and suddenly a thought hit me so hard I couldn't ignore it. Why was I spending the final chapter of my life carrying a grown man who refused to carry himself? That realization hurt, because many of us were raised differently. We were taught to help family no matter what. To sacrifice quietly. To keep giving even when we were exhausted. But there is a difference between helping someone through a difficult season and supporting a pattern that never changes. There is a difference between compassion and enabling, and once I understood that difference, I knew something had to change. So I sat Daniel down. one evening and calmly told him he needed to move out within 30 days. There was no yelling, no anger, no cruelty, just honesty. He looked shocked, then hurt, then offended, but deep down I knew something important. I had already waited far too long, and after he left, something remarkable happened. My home felt like mine again. The quiet returned. The sense of peace returned. Even my health improved, because stress affects an aging body far more than most people realize. And that brings me to the fifth and final type of person you should avoid in old age: the ungrateful person. At first glance, this may not seem as serious as manipulation, criticism, or irresponsibility, but I've come to believe that chronic ingratitude leaves its own kind of wound, a slow one, a quiet one, because when you spend years giving to people sincerely, and your kindness is treated as something expected rather than appreciated, you eventually begin to feel invisible. Ungrateful people rarely offer genuine gratitude. Nothing ever feels like enough. If you give your time, they focus on what you didn't give. If you help them, they criticize how you helped. If you make sacrifices, they act as though you simply fulfilled a duty. And after enough years around people like that, generosity begins to change. It slowly turns into resentment. I remember a woman from my church community named Eleanor. Every Christmas season, I would volunteer to drive several seniors around town so they could enjoy the holiday lights. Many of them could no longer drive safely at night. Some had vision problems, others simply didn't feel comfortable being on the road after dark. So I would bundle everyone into the car, put on Christmas music, and spend the evening driving through neighborhoods decorated with lights and holiday displays. For most of them, it became one of the highlights of the season, and honestly, I enjoyed it. 2. Watching their faces light up reminded me that simple acts of kindness still matter. I genuinely enjoyed those evenings. There was something beautiful about watching older faces light up with the same excitement children have during the holidays. But Eleanor found something to criticize every single time. It was too cold, too crowded, too slow, the wrong neighborhood, the wrong restaurant afterward. One year I spent nearly 6 hours organizing a small holiday dinner for the group. After all that effort, the only comment she made was that the mashed potatoes were dry. I remember driving home that night feeling strangely empty, not angry, not hurt, just tired. And somewhere during that drive, I realized something important. Gratitude is emotional oxygen. Human beings need appreciation the same way plants need sunlight. And that's especially true as we grow older. Many seniors already feel overlooked by society. A sincere thank you can warm an aging heart far more than most people realize. After that, I stopped exhausting myself trying to earn appreciation from people who treated kindness as something ordinary. Instead, I invested my energy in relationships where care flowed both ways, and life became noticeably lighter because of it. You know, when you're young, you believe life is mostly about achievement, building a career, raising children, paying off a mortgage, chasing goals, proving yourself. But growing older changes your definition of a good life. Peace becomes a form of wealth. A calm morning feels luxurious. A stress-free afternoon becomes more valuable than impressing anyone, and the people around you matter more than almost anything else, because they either protect your spirit or slowly drain it. I don't hate any of the people I've talked about today. I truly don't. Many of them were probably carrying wounds I never fully understood. But age teaches you a lesson that took me decades to learn. Compassion does not require unlimited access. You can care about someone deeply while still protecting yourself from the damage they bring into your life. That lesson took me nearly 80 years to understand. So if there's someone in your life who consistently leaves you feeling anxious, exhausted, guilty, invisible, or emotionally diminished, please don't ignore those feelings anymore. At this stage of life, peace is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Protect the years you still have. Protect your heart. Protect the small, quiet joys that continue to make life worth living. And if no one has told you this recently, let this old man remind you, you are still allowed to choose yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I sincerely hope these words brought you a little comfort, maybe even a little clarity. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again very soon.